thank you, Ian. Yeah, I mean, what can I say now, really? I mean, I've just been humbled beyond words at all those gratifying and inspiring words from dear friends and colleagues. People who have all been part of my independent living journey and our independent living journey, literally back into the 1970s. I think Jane really touched something very deep. And she said something about independent living. The difference between independent living and other disability politics is that we've all stuck together. We've had a very strong group of people that through thick and thin and through conflict and through attack and diversity and all sorts of different issues, we've held strong. And to me, those memories I really cherish, and that's what gives me strength. Because I've always said that this day is not just my day, it's our day. And I think it's really great that we have something to celebrate. These last 6 years, I think people have touched upon it. We've been through the most difficult times of our lives as far as the disability movement in this country, where we've seen services cut, we've seen organizations go down, and we've really seen people up against the wall. But even despite that, we are strong. And I think, we still hold forth. And we have now a Baroness Jane, who over the last 5 years, within the House of Lords, has been struggling on the legislative level for our independence and for our work. And in a political climate that is not easy. I do thank Jane for all she is doing that with Rosalie and our other allies, because what's come out today is that we need allies. We had an ally at the beginning in Derek Bailey, and without him, this probably wouldn't have happened, That man, with his vision, was never ever fully realized. I think only now we're all realizing that. And thanks also to Chris and Ruth, who carried that light of Derek through. And I think to live in Hampshire, we can be quite proud because we have that heritage. I mean, I really feel gifted that, this is where I ended up. Fate is a very strange thing. Jerry asked me to say a few reflections about Project 81, but I think I've had a lot of the stuff I was going to say, the two Phillips have already said it. So I will say a few things about that, because they were important days, and I'll come back to fate a little bit later. I think we became famous thanks to a foreword that was put into one of our publications. I think it was the source book towards independently, by the disabled rock star Ian Drury. And he labelled us the Escape Committee. And ever since the whole thing's become as the Great Escape. And I think we've known throughout, well, not only in this country now, but throughout Europe because of our way of doing that. I don't know, Jerry said try and reflect upon those days. Those days were amazing. When Philip and I got together and the two Phillips and Project 81, there was an amazing amount of excitement. I mean, you might find it surprising for me to say I was actually having the time of my life, but I was in a residential home. Because as Philip said, Philip Scott, we did party a lot, and we did make the most of our time, because we worked hard to try and develop independent living and to share our ideas and to meet other people and to do the research that we're doing, but we knew we always had to have a good time. We had to, really, and we were fortunate in some respects, because where we lived, there were a lot of other younger people there. And so we all got together and went out and sort of used to explore the pubs around Hampshire and all sorts of things. And a lot of people don't know those kinds of stories of Project 81, but they were important because it kept us going, the party and the fun. No, but fate, I'll come back to fate, because when what you don't know about me is that I lived independently. I lived independently before I lived in the Court Cheshire home. So after I broke my neck in 1975, when I finally was rehabilitated following my spinal injury, I was enabled to live in the community by the support I had from my girlfriend at the time and a very close friend. And for a year and a half we strived, or we survived rather. We survived against all odds. I mean, there was no support there. There was no financial support or anything. It was just the love and their support as friends of mine that kept me going. In the end, when that relationship broke down, I was faced with the prospect of going into residential care. I broke my neck at 25, and I pretty much travelled the world in those 25 years. I travelled all over Europe, I travelled to the Middle East, to Turkey a number of times, to the States, and I broke my neck in New Mexico in the States. So I really knew what freedom was. Freedom to be a young person in the late 60s and early 70s. Probably one of the best times to be a young person. There was a lot happening, and I was part of that. And that in a sense, gave me the strength to be who I was after I broke my neck, when suddenly my life changed. But I still had to face this prospect. Despite all that freedom of those first 27 years, I was then left with this prospect of moving into residential care. And none of you in this room could realize or could understand the terror, the fear, and just the thoughts I had about going into this residential home. I mean, you know, it was like I'm going into a prison. I really felt that I was going to lose my freedom and everything else. But when I finally gave in and accepted it, and went to the court to make a visit, just to test it out, see what it was. It was really strange because I went in through the automatic opening doors, and who should I see in front of my eyes? Mr. Philip Mason, sitting there waiting to greet me. And that moment, that glance, was in fact, or that encounter, that meeting, was to change, I think, both our lives. Little did we know at the time. But Philip politely showed me around the home, explained everything in great detail, as he always does, you know, about what was going on and what wasn't going on. And there was one hint he gave me after our discussion. He knew where I was, because I was at that point, I'd been living in the New Forest in a little place called Godsill, you know, almost like a summer home with my friend. And the point of moving into the court, I was almost homeless, because I had to leave the place where I was living in the New Forest and go to live in Newport. But I had a month in between where I had to go and stay with my family in Wales. And Philip gave me this great bit of advice at that point. He said, for whatever you do, don't tell anybody you're going to Wales. I mean, in my, you know, I am a true Welshman. And in most respects, I would feel very, very negative about a comment like that. But I did realise what he was saying. Because he said, if you go to Wales, there'll be no chance of you getting back into this place. Stay on the books in Hampshire. Otherwise, you had it. And that fate is, otherwise, just think of the consequences if that did not happen. And I did end up moving to Wales. I wouldn't be in the same situation as I was now. So that was an amazing meeting, and well, the rest is all history. I think, you know, Philip, the two Philips have already said about the importance of Project A1 and some of the great things. But you know, it was an amazing time. The ideas that we were sharing each other, everybody was contributing. It was alive. It was exciting. It was I don't know. We knew we were onto something big. We didn't realise fully what it was, and none of us would have ever realised the kind of, you know, the effect it would have, you know, right through until and now and beyond. But I mean, that supported each other. Because we often talk about the importance of peer support, about supporting each other. But that was the reality of it, was that little group of people supporting each other, you know, so strongly. And that's what made, I think, Project 81 a success. And what was also inspirational was meeting all the other people. Because when we were doing research, we were studying and finding out, well, as Rachel said in the message, about Ken and Maggie Davis in Derbyshire, who were doing their thing. And Rachel in Greenwich and Neville Stroger and Lorraine Gradwell in Manchester. Suddenly we were being connected with all these people, and these were in days where there was no internet and no fax. All we had to do was either write letters or make phone calls. But the network was there, it was already unfolding, and that expanded around this country and expanded around Europe and internationally. I remember in 1982, Philip and I, and this was even before I moved out of Newport, Philip and I suddenly found out, because we knew what independent living was, and we knew about Berkeley, California, and all that, because we found out about it. And then there was this first international conference on independent living in Munich. And sure enough, myself and Philip felt we had to go, regardless. And that was at a time when there weren't many adapted vehicles or anything. And we both said to ourselves, well, what are we going to do? And we found a place in Portsmouth where they adapted special vehicles called Limingtons. And Philip and I went down there to meet them. I said, look, we want to go to this international conference in Munich, on independent living, but is there any chance we might be able to borrow one of your vehicles or hire one of your vehicles from us, and then we can promote you in Munich? Well, anyway, unfortunately, they were so limited in the amount of vehicles they had available. We couldn't have it, so what they said was, okay, we'll give you this vehicle, just a normal vehicle with nothing on it. And it wasn't even adapted, it was just a van, no windows except in the front, no ramps, nothing to clamp us down inside or anything. But we said, yeah, we'll go for it. So we went off to Germany, trucked off to Germany in this totally unadapted vehicle. And we got a set of ramps so we could get in and out. And then we got a lot of very strong ties to tie the wheelchairs down as we went. And in the back we put a bed, and we went there with Virginia, with Philip and 2 other PAs. And literally that was a transforming. That's when we met Judy Heumann. I'd met her in California before that, but Adolf Ratzke and all the people around Europe. And that's when the European network literally was started, even though it didn't start until 1989 officially. But yeah, well, that trip was quite, I won't go into all the stories about that trip, but it was one of the few times in my life that when I almost fell out with dear Virginia, Philip's wife, about a few things, because Philip and Virginia were always very organised. And when we turned up in Munich, the accommodation that was provided for us when we got there was a house that was being built. And there was cement there and everything, and you couldn't believe. And poor Virginia, I think, will never forgive me for that. So the first thing we did the following day was Virginia went off with one of the other PAs to try and find a hotel to stay in so we could have a nice quiet stay after that. But that was quite a trip. I mean, that was where we managed to get, the connections with Europe and go beyond that. There are so many stories, so many anecdotes. I could go on and on and on. Philip also referred to one earlier about our famous exercise at the independent living bungalow. Because we had this man, I will mention him publicly now. Some people might know him. A professor of rehabilitation, Ted Cantrell. We'll never forget that name. And he was the man that said, no, there's no chance, no way you guys are going to be able to live independently with the support needs that you have. And we discussed it and we tried to persuade him. He said, I know what I do. Well, how about going off to an independent living bungalow for a week and seeing what you can do? We set it up. And I didn't like the idea at all. I thought, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that at all. But the 2 Philips managed to persuade me to go along. Come on, Joe, you've got to play the game. Go there for a week, try it out, and then you can say, look, you did it, and then you can move on. Yeah, we did it, and it's great that Jane Henshaw, or is now Jane Ireland, the head OT at the time at that unit, is able to come and join us today. Neither Philip or I have seen her for a long time. But that week we had together with Jane was really great. Even though we struggled to keep our PAs in with enough money to drink beer all week. When Philip and I were busily trying to apply ourselves in what was then the kind of state-of-art sort of adapted kitchen, our PAs were exploring all the real A pubs in Salisbury. But no, it was good, but we had a great time. I always remember it because it was the time that Bob Marley died. As well, that week we were there, he died. I was a great fan of Bob Marley. But Philip and I, but we went out in the nights. Philip and I joined our PAs in the night too. We made sure they didn't have all the fun without us. Yeah, but also, what was also interesting after that, during that event, was that the spinal injury unit at Odstock Hospital was being set up at that time, and that opened up in 1984. So I think it was 1984, wasn't it? Yeah. So it'll be their 30th anniversary this year too. But then Philip and I, because one of the outcomes of that 1 week in the independent living bungalow was that Philip and I then were asked by Jane if we could train all the new management staff coming in, the director and the head OT and the head physio and the nursing officer in that unit. And so we were right in training the staff right from the start as to what the importance of living independently in the community at that time. So another story I will tell you about, because dear old Tadeusz Polkowski, who was one of the other members, because unfortunately we have lost a lot of friends and colleagues over the years. Tad, those of you who know him, was a large character with a large kind of, I don't know, body. He was a wheelchair user. But when he stood up, he must have been 6'9". He towered above everybody and terrified people. And Ron always has a funny story about Tad. I think it was a New Year's Eve. And Ron lived across the road from Liz Briggs, one of the other members of Project 81. I think one day Tad had a few drinks. He said, let's go over and see Ron across the road. And so he did. He dragged himself over there with one of the PAs and knocked the door. But what he did was, he stood up in his wheelchair right in front of Ron's door. And Ron, as everybody knows, is not a very strong, sort of, IT person. And so when he came to the door, Tad, Ron always tells us about that story about Tad terrifying him to death once, looking into the dark. But so anyway, we went out. Tad and I got the offer of a free holiday on a barge. This was before there were any accessible barges. Just like we went off to Munich in another adapted vehicle. Tad and I pretty much got on the barge. It was hardly adapted in 1979, I think it was. Anyway, we got on there. Dear old Tad did his best in the week that we were there to pretty much dismantle and destroy the whole barge. And it became so embarrassing as we went on. The first thing he did, the loo was the first thing to go. He crushed the loo. Then he went for a shower. Then the shower started falling apart. And thankfully, the last thing he did, it was on the last day we were on that holiday, was to put the lift out of action. Otherwise, we would have been in dire straits if that had happened at the beginning. But the people who owned the boat, I think they pretty much regretted giving us that free holiday on the barge that week, because I think it caused so much damage. But anyway, it was an interesting experience all the time. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to stop there because you've been sitting listening to people speaking and seeing all these videos, and I think we want to party and enjoy ourselves and meet and network. But I will, before I do finish, I think it's important just to remember some of those achievements that we've had over the years, and I'll only mention a few. I'm sure most of you in this room will mention others. But 1988, the Right to Not Charity campaign. And some of us in this room, Rachel's not here today, but Jane, myself and Alia organised that demonstration, which became known as the Battle of the Elephant and Castle. But what was interesting about that demonstration was when the government was going through a major welfare reform at the time, and they took away a benefit that we were putting towards our independent living packages called domestic care assistance. And that was what we demonstrated, because that was so critical for many people, that money. But after the demonstration, what was important was that the Independent Living Fund came out of it. After us demonstrating, that was the birth of the Independent Living Fund, which we all know is a fund that has transformed people's lives. And over the last 3 or 4 years, we've been fighting to keep it, because the government announced in 2010 that it was going to stop it in 2015. Thankfully, last November, 5 disabled people who took the government to court were proved right that the government were wrong in not looking at the public duty legislation and about the long-term impact it was going to have on the quality of life of disabled people. 1989, ENIL was formed, and Rachel again, myself, Philip, and also Carl Ford and Etienne, who were also pleased that Etienne's been able to join us from Glasgow, and we haven't seen each other for ages. It'd be really nice to talk to you later. We went out, we represented the UK in Strasbourg in 1989, where the European Network for Independent Living was formed. After that, again, of course, when we came back, then we met up with Jane and others, and that was when the BCODP Independent Living Committee was formed. And one of our primary tasks when we formed that was to make direct payments legal in this country, so that those of us who were lucky to be living in places like Hampshire, who were being funded then by different schemes, wasn't always the case in other parts of the country, where lots of local authorities were not up to risk themselves because of the legal situation. And we felt, no, we have to have a law to change that, so it will be for everybody around the country. Every disabled person can have the opportunity to live independently. And we started that in 1989, and it was 2004 when then Virginia Bottomley, the Minister of Health, announced that she was going to bring in direct payments legislation and make it law. So that was quite, I think we could change the law in 5 years or something like that. That time, was not bad, when it took us 14 years to get disability discrimination legislation. It came out in 1995. And I could go on and on and on, but the Direct Payments Act came out in 1996. And then we had the Improving Life Chances report in 2004, thanks to Jenny Morris and other colleagues who worked within the government to try and do that. And that really paved the way for the next 10 years, along with the Independent Living Strategy and so on. I mean, I won't forget the United Nations Convention either. It came out in 2007, because that's what we strive for still. Because within that, it does have Article 19, which is all about supporting independent living in the community. And I think most of us here feel quite strongly, and that's the kind of legislation that we need in this country as well. A right to independent living, because without it, we still are at the mercy of changes of governments that could quite easily change it and take it away. Right, I'm going to bring this to an end now, really. And I think before I do, I think there's a couple of thank yous, or a few thank yous I want to make for those people who've been responsible for making this happen. It wasn't me that made this happen. It was me, my life, and independent living. And I had a gentle conversation in a pub a few months ago with Jerry and Francis and Philip. I said, look, I didn't realise it's 30 years this December I've been living independently. I think Jerry Uzab grasped that idea and really has been working very hard for the last few months bringing this together. And I think he's done a tremendous job. I know probably Francis has been behind him as well. And also to Ian, because I think Jerry took the idea to Ian to see whether they'd host it here at Spectrum. Ian and the management committee of Spectrum CIL, who put themselves up and hosted it and funded it, thank you, provided the money for all the drinks and food that we're going to have later. I think it's significant that Spectrum did put it, because I have been involved with Spectrum, or Southampton CIL as it was called, from the outset, from the beginning in 1986 when it was set up, or 1984, sorry, because they've got their 30-year celebration later this year as well. Because Simon Brissenden, one of the main founders, was part of Project 81 as well at the beginning. He was on our management committee and we knew him quite well. And after we set up HCIL in Hampshire, he then set up Southampton. And it's great to have, I think, Alia here, because she's one of the few surviving members left that set up that CIL, because I think we lost Simon, Hazel, Mel, and a few others that set that up. I think there's just about 2 left now, Alia. So it's great that she's here as well. So thank you to all of you, every one of you that has made the effort to come here today, some from quite far afield. I think the first is my dear friend Lotta, who was my first personal assistant when I moved out into my own place, who's been able to join us from Denmark, and Etienne and Susie from Glasgow, and Chris and Jill from Cumbria, and my family from Wales. And to all of you, because this is what today's about. It's about us enjoying ourselves and celebrating. Let's enjoy it. Because we thought, do we need to celebrate something after these last few years? And yeah, I'm looking forward to meeting those of you I haven't talked to yet. So thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. John Evans celebrating John's Day today.
Our day.